Hello! How are you doing, good people of the world? So, moving onward further into the composition. Before I get started, I just want to say I apologize that the bass is so flipping loud coming through this camera. I have no idea why that's the case, but I assure you, and I'm sure you can hear from, the actual audio that I post in the video project, that, it doesn't actually sound that bass heavy, so I'm sorry that the bass is just blurting everything out for some reason. It does not sound like that in real life. Anyway, so, made a few changes. So, after I tried to make the repetition of the first melody work, an octave lower with a simpler setup, but it didn't seem, I don't know, it just felt redundant. Like, it's like we just heard this theme, why do we need to hear it again? And I was thinking, for example, the Star Wars theme, you have the main theme, he only plays it once, and then he goes to the B theme, and then he sort of builds up to it, and he gives this huge build to it. Excuse my terrible out-of-tune humming, but he gives a huge build-up in between the B section so that you expect and want to hear the A section again. But, here we're literally just repeating it, and because of the fact that the melody in of itself has a repetition of the main motivic cell, boom, ba 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 bum 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 ba bum 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 ba da ba da dun 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 boom ba da ba dum bum bum, since it repeats that main motivic cell twice, it's like if we repeat all of it over again, it just, I don't know. So without, monologuing too much about it, I am decided to omit that and just go straight to the B section, especially since we're going to have a reprise of this main theme later. So this is actually the legato section that we're going to be going into today, because we're just sort of skipping that other section. So yeah, so we had an extra bar of sort of calm down point, bam, ba, 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 boom, and then we had a sort of chill bar. So I basically took that, if you remember that, let's go ahead and play it here. Okay, so, that ending of the first melody, we had, if you could hear, some wind runs. So I just basically took that and repeated it in a lower register with the oboes and including the clarinets and the bassoons. Sort of just, kind of calming the orchestra down, so to speak, to lead into the next section. And then I just had pretty much, that was all that was going on. I had a suspended cymbal, kind of gluing the two sections together. And then I have some string. You know what? It would probably be best if I just go ahead and play it for you, and then I'll explain it. Boom, ba 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 bum 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 ba bum 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 bum. It'll start developing that theme, but yeah. So that gives you a sense of what that sounds like. So yeah. So like I said, see if I can. So the string section, in between the last section and this section, sort of chills down. I try to have had some nice part writing. The bass instruments, cello and contrabass, actually switched to pizzicato, which I find works very nicely for these sorts of legato sections, because it gives, boom, doom, it gives a nice movement to it, because you don't want for these middle sections, you don't want the energy to fade away. You don't, you still want that rhythmic vitality, but you want it to be more, legato. So you can have all these legato things going on top, and then pizzicato bass underneath. So yeah, and then I had some, nice three-part string writing. The strings sort of work their way up melodically to this G where they need to be, but they kind of end downward. So if you pay attention to the first violins, you can see how I sort of melodically lead them up to the next phrase. They kind of lead themselves up. And that's another thing, a tip I have when orchestrating is that if you ever need to do something for the sake of doing something, in other words, if you need to just adjust the part writing, not for a musical or melodic reason, but you just need to have the violins be ready to go up to that high note, try to make it sound like you would have done that anyway, even if a violin could just effortlessly go up there. You know what I mean? Make it sound like you had a musical reason. Take these sort of patchwork musical decision fixes, so to speak, to make it more idiomatic, and try to turn them into, think musical ideas in of themselves. So you can listen to the entire string section and see how it goes into the next section. And you can listen to all the individual parts, and they have nice melodies. You can hear how the part writing, each part leads very well into the next part. Right. No, dissonant intervals, things like that. Right. And then, if you notice the bass instruments, the cello and the double bass, I gave them a rest so they can switch to pizzicato, because sometimes it can be difficult, especially if they're bow. If they end on an up bow, or let me see if they end, well, let's put it this way, if they end a phrase bowing wise where their hand is away from the bridge of the instrument, it's going to be difficult for them to instantly move over and be able to pluck the note. So unless you work the bowing out ahead of time, which isn't really that big of a deal, you can just give them a little bit of space. So for this particular section, I started with this bass line. I always like to start with bass lines, and you'll listen, even though this bass line is very simple, it has a nice melodic contour to it, which I always try to, as I've said before, always try to add. So you just listen to the pizzicato bass line. See, even in that, it just has a nice sort of, boom, boom, lee da da, lee da da, lee dee da 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 da, boom, 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 boom. So, little details like that are what the players in real life, actually enjoy if they have a melodically decent part in of themselves, and they really can dig that. So the upper violins are literally just taking the melody in octaves. So I brought them down to mezzo forte because I still want it to be loud, but I don't want it to be. I want it to be a little bit chiller. So the violas have this triplet sort of, but I made it. I didn't make it like a repetitive ostinato. Again, I tried to make it melodically interesting, but still working with harmony. So you can listen to this. And then they go up to join the other strings in triple octaves for this big push for the second half of the the melody. So we'll talk about this first section. So we have all that going on, and then we have the harp, which gives this nice little sort of arpeggiated motion. So you can see it's not that complicated. Like, it has a very simple contour, but it's almost, I almost try to treat arpeggiations like these as drum beats, in the sense that you have the beat that just repeats itself, but then sort of every fourth beat or fourth bar, then you add an embellishment like a drum fill. So that's kind of how I treat these types of things. So you're making it simple enough that the harpist or pianist can easily pick it up and sight read it, and it's like, oh, it's just a repetitive thing, but then you give a little embellishment of it so it doesn't get boring. So just find a balance between the two of those. But then I actually did the piano, I had double what the violas were doing, because they're down there, especially against these octave strings. The violas are going to be pretty quiet. So I gave piano with pedal, which actually goes quite well if with the. I made sure that the viola and piano line, doubling each other, went well with the harp line. Like, I made sure that they work together contrapuntally, so you can hear them go well together. so they work together for that. All of that together gives a very nice rolling sound. So I'll go ahead and play the the harp, the piano, and the string section together. So the pizzicato bass is really nice. Right, a nice little major 7th chord when we get to that. E flat. I think it's an E flat chord. E flat major 7 chord. And let's see what else we have going on here. I think we have some horns. Are only 3 horns, and this is actually kind of something I like to do with 6 horns. Again, sometimes you can split the horns up into different sections, so that's actually what I did here. Now, I was a little bit lazy with my notation. Notice how I have 3 horns up here, and then down here we have the other horn section. Now, if you're writing for a real player, well, sometimes film scores do it differently, but generally you want to have your horns every other. In other words, you have your first horns, and then your third horns, and then your second horns, and your fourth horns, and your fifth horns, and or I think I messed it up, but you want to basically have every other part, or you can write them down sequentially, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but make sure that horn 1 has the high parts along with horn 3, and horn 5 has the high parts. So 1, 3, and 5 are high horns, and 2, 4, and 6 are sort of the lower horns, if that makes any sense. So just be aware of these things and realize that, when I notate things like this, I'm just doing it to be quick. If I was writing for live instruments, I would make sure that everything was engraved properly. But anyway, so we have these triads that just very simply, mimicking the rhythm of the pizzicato bass. Very simple. So, and they can, stagger breathe through that. Bum 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 bum. They can easily breathe through that. And then we have this horn counter line that goes bum ba ba bum bum ba bum 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 bum. Right. So which has a nice little sort of add to chord extension, like which sounds nice. It almost sounds like a ninth, which is just a nice, it's a nice embellishment under the chord that makes it sound, very sweeping and romantic. So I'll just play that. And notice that these upper horns are individual, 1 horn per note on a triad, whereas down here these are 3 horns all doubling each other on this counterline so they can be heard better. So I'll go ahead and play the horns plus the horn counterline along with all the string stuff that we've been paying attention to, so you can hear how it all builds. Put a gong there, bum 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 boom dun dun dun, ba boom. I feel like every time you have an extension again with a chord, like like I was just talking about that, or if the minor chord, when I feel like a gong or a cymbal hit is always needed there to sort of give it the, sort of breath of fresh air. I don't know if that makes any sense. I just instinctively always feel like a gong, some sort of percussion hit is needed there. Yeah, so beyond that, the only other thing we have to talk about for this first half of the legato melody is literally just the flutes are doubling the melody to give a nice sound. So, sorry for hitting the camera there. So, generally speaking, and I've said this before, you don't ever really want to have winds double each other unless it's a really thick 2D texture and you just want the whole band going. But if you have just solo instruments or a few instruments doubling each other, you generally don't want to have... I mean, it probably would sound fine if the flutes doubled in this case, but what I did was I had the upper flutes up in this higher register on mezzo forte. Right, and then I had the lower flutes in a lower register, but on forte, and they're still going to be very quiet. But flutes and octaves give a nice sound. So especially when they get down to this G, they're going to be hard pressed to be heard, but it'll work and it'll give a nice. It gives them something to play. Yeah, and that's pretty much, that's the only other thing, and then we listen to it, and that's what it sounds like. later section is sort of this, nice big push. Typical wind runs, boom. So I just use septuplets, so they go from the G down to the bottom. And notice for this section, this is where I doubled the flutes in the same high octave to give that piercing sound. So there you go. And notice how again with slurs I always mark breathing with the wind instruments, and articulation. So actually, I just noticed this. This actually should not be like this. This should have the same breathing that the flutes have. I just copied and pasted that over to save time from the strings. So that's another thing you got to be careful of, with the whole copy and paste thing. If you double a line with another instrument, you got to make sure that you switch the slurring so that it's not bowing and, change the phrase structure. But anyway, for this second section, I have this nice horn counterline going along with the main melody. Now we have all 6 horns going, but still only a mezzo forte. So it goes like this. Later on, they start doubling the melody. And notice how, the melody actually works quite well, because if you have intervals like the fourth, boom, 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 ba, 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 going up to that high C, well, if this is going to be too loud, and it's just not a good place to have a high C for the horns. It's too legato and soft. So I move them down, ba, boo, and it doesn't sound awkward with the part writing, because a fourth just inverts to a fifth, and it actually still sounds like a decent melody. But it doesn't sound like you're embellishing the melody, because they're just that low C is still reinforcing the overtones of the high Cs, which are being held out because we have this full string section going. So my point is, if you listen to these upper 3 strings along with the horns, even though the horns do go down to that, they change the notes of the melody in order to fit the range of the instrument better, it still doesn't change the effect that the melody has. Actually 2 places where the horns go down instead of up in order to fit their range, better. So that's a little trick you can use. So I took what the horns were doing earlier, bum ba ba bum ba, that sort of slow stay motion, and again changed the strings to the lower bass instruments to have that, and I changed them to arco, which is bowing instead of pizzicato for the thicker sound. And again, notice here I gave them plenty of time to switch between pizzicato and arco. So because there's so much else going on, I just simplified it. And as stated before, the contrabass, especially in film score settings, can go down to that low C. That's going to be a major third below the E, the normal bottom of range. Bottom note of the contrabass's register, if they have a C extension, which allows them to go down there. So, always make sure that you check, if you're writing for real orchestra, that your basses have a C extension. So, yep. So, beyond that, we have the horn counter line, we have the strings, and then we have the trombones, which have a raspier, a bit louder, more prominent sound, which sort of take up what the horns were doing a second ago with these chords. And like I said, even when you write tiny little 3-part things like this, you always want to make sure that you follow your part writing rules, because it will make everyone have an individually good part. It'll make it sound good in the larger context. Try to make the parts, have as much oblique and contrary motion, as possible. If you don't know what those words mean, look up part writing rules. Try to avoid parallel fifths unless you're specifically going for that sound. So, and also I had a few specific, very specific spots of percussion. I tried to use percussion as much as I could, but notice how I used like timpani and bass drum, and then a crash cymbal, and then a gong, and then a suspended cymbal. So I sort of went, oops, my apologies. I went all over the place and sort of did different effects to give it a sense of sweepingness, so it doesn't seem redundant, like, oh, crash cymbal, another crash cymbal, another, which a lot of people I've noticed, a lot of amateur composers do that. So try to have a lot of variety, which you can, especially like if you want to have these big accents, if you set up, you can have a timpani, a bass drum, crash cymbal, suspended cymbal, and gong. That's like 5 different options for you to use, so take advantage of that. So suspended cymbal, gong, another suspended cymbal. So you can see it gives a nice sweeping sound. It doesn't get redundant, so to speak. All right, so what else do we have going on here? The flute's doubling. The oboes, I have doubling that horn line, which, is in a nice, thick, meaty, ducky sort of piercing register for them, which is good. An octave above. So the reason I didn't keep them in the same register, one, because that low C, if I put it down here, bum, 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 that low C wouldn't that'd be out of the range of the oboe, and it'd be a little bit, probably the tone would be a little bit too nasal down there. And also, if you double the oboes with any other instrument, sometimes it can be slightly flat, so it's not going to sound the best. So it's, that's why I didn't have both oboes going. I only have one oboe going, and it's an octave above. It's not doubling anything. And then again, it turned over, ma 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 boom boom bum bum bum. It turned over and started doubling the melody later to give a really big melodic push. Later on. I think that's it. The only other things that I need to talk about is I have this Glockenspiel, which just gives a light little melodic push for the cadence. Right? Bum 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 bum. And notice instead of going down here, bum bum, I went up here because it gives a nicer resonance to the sound. And again, you listen to the melody contextually, and because of the high strings, it just enforces the overtone, so it doesn't sound like bum 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 bum. It sounds like bum 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 bum, even in the bell. It's like an audio illusion. So it's quite interesting how that works. And I like this low bass down here. Boom, it gives a really nice thick meatiness to the texture. So yeah, so then the harp and piano, which were doing different things before, because we're in a thicker texture now, they need to be doubling each other. So they basically just have these arpeggiated, embellished on arpeggiations. I'll play them for you. A couple things I want to note: if you're writing a real harp part, you got to be careful with pedaling, which I wasn't here. For example, when we go to the G minor chord, ma bum, the A is natural because I just like the sound of that, sort of almost borrowing from the Dorian mode. In the key of C minor, when we go to that G minor chord, raise the 6th, which would be, again, A flat to A natural. I wanted to have that sound and then go back to A flat. Now, they might be able to make a pedal change like that, but if they're playing that A flat and then, remember, because harps are not like pianos. They don't really have pedals. Notes always ring out unless they mute them with their hand. So if they play an A flat, which is just continuing to ring out, and then they change the pedal to A, you're going to get a nasty little buzz on the string, which might not be heard in a full texture like this, but just something to be careful about. So the only reason, that I went to A natural and then back to A flat, as well as use this F sharp here, bum, bum, bum. So notice how bum. I sort of doubled the melody here and then put other embellishment notes in between the melody. So I still wanted to, that type of a thing. So again, with the F sharp and the A flats and the A naturals, if I knew I was writing for real orchestra, I would rework my harp and piano part so that it either didn't incorporate those, or I gave the harpist a chance to change pedals, or I had 2 harpists or something like that. So, I mean, there's more than one solution to work around for that. But like I said, it's one of those things where I know that my samples can do it, so I really have no problem going with that. It's not a huge deal. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and play everything from the beginning. That's pretty much it. Or I'll play it from here. pretty satisfied with it. It's a nice sound. It flows very well from the previous section. So what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and let you listen to, the actual audio file, so you don't get this crappy, external audio. I'll let you listen to the audio of all of what we have so far. So, and then we will work on the next section next time. So, see you then.